Tonight, we will tell you a story about a time when the world was filled with gods, and every aspect of human life, from the planting of seeds to the warmth of love, was considered divine. You will learn why the ancient Greeks, a people known for their philosophy, art, and warfare, also celebrated their gods with festivals that, to modern eyes, might seem surprising in their openness and their focus on what we call erotic themes. We will explore how their understanding of life, fertility, and pleasure was deeply intertwined with their worship, and how these celebrations were not about mere indulgence, but about a profound connection to the very forces of creation. You will discover the true meaning behind these ancient rituals and why they were considered sacred, essential, and entirely natural to the people of that age. This is a journey into a different way of seeing the world, a world where the divine was everywhere, even in the most primal human experiences. Oh, and if you enjoy these stories, please consider subscribing to the channel and leave a comment below with topics you would like us to explore in future episodes. New sleep stories are released here every day. All right, find a comfortable spot, let your body relax, and prepare to journey back in time to a world where the sacred and the sensual were not separated, but embraced as one. We begin by understanding the very foundation of their beliefs, how the ancient Greeks perceived their gods not as distant, abstract beings, but as living forces interwoven with every breath and every harvest. Tonight, we will journey back to a world where the very fabric of existence was interwoven with the divine. We will explore the ancient Greek understanding of life, a perspective so profoundly different from our own, yet so vital to comprehending why their festivals, dedicated to their gods, often embraced elements we might consider, by modern standards, to be deeply personal or even private. This is a story about how a culture saw the sacred in every breath, every harvest, and every human desire. Imagine, if you will, the world of the ancient Greeks. For them, the gods were not distant, ethereal beings residing solely in an abstract heaven. They were intimately present in every facet of life. The sky above, the earth beneath, the sea that surrounded their lands, the wind that filled their sails, the fire that warmed their homes, the very growth of the crops in their fields, and the beating of their own hearts, all were direct manifestations of divine power. Every sunrise was Helios, the sun god, driving his chariot across the heavens. Every storm was Zeus, the king of the gods, expressing his mighty will with thunder and lightning. Every gentle breeze was a whisper from the nymphs. This constant, tangible presence of the divine meant that daily life was not separate from worship, but an ongoing act of connection. Crucially, the gods of Olympus were depicted with profoundly human characteristics. They loved fiercely. They experienced jealousy. They engaged in rivalries. They celebrated with unrestrained joy, and they knew sorrow. They had families. They formed alliances, and they possessed desires not unlike those of mortals. These deities were not perfect moral arbiters in the way some later traditions might conceive of gods. They were reflections, magnified and immortal, of the full spectrum of human experience. This anthropomorphic nature of their gods was fundamental. If the gods themselves experienced passion, desire, and the urge to procreate, then these very impulses, when felt by humans, were also seen as divine aspects, as gifts from the gods, rather than as something separate or even sinful. Consider the pantheon. Zeus, the mighty father whose power extended to fertility and the continuation of lineages. Hera, his queen, presided over marriage and childbirth, ensuring the sacred bond between husband and wife and the propagation of families. And then there was Aphrodite, the goddess born from the sea, the embodiment of love, beauty, desire, and procreation. Her very essence was about attraction and the coming together of beings. To honor Aphrodite was to honor the very impulse that leads to life itself. Similarly, Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, ecstasy, and liberation, was also a powerful fertility deity. His domain was the wild, untamed spirit, the breaking down of inhibitions, and the vibrant, overflowing life force found in the vine and in human celebration. His worship involved reaching a state of divine madness, a joyous abandonment of the everyday self, a profound connection to primal energy. Demeter, the goddess of agriculture and harvest, represented the fertility of the earth itself, the cycles of planting, growth, and reaping that sustained all life. Her daughter Persephone and the story of her descent into the underworld and subsequent return symbolized the eternal cycle of death and rebirth in nature, mirroring the very rhythm of human existence and the promise of renewal. For the ancient Greeks, the concept of fertility extended far beyond mere biological reproduction. It encompassed the flourishing of the land, the abundance of crops, the health of livestock, the prosperity of the community, and the very vitality of the human spirit. These were not viewed as separate phenomena, but as interconnected aspects of a single, vibrant cosmic order sustained and governed by the gods. Therefore, to ensure the continuity of life, to guarantee plentiful harvests, to maintain the health of their families and cities, it was imperative to honor the deities associated with these life-giving forces. Worship was not just about making petitions. It was about participating in the divine flow, about acknowledging the sacred energy that permeated things. When the Greeks held festivals, they were not merely performing rituals. They were engaging in a communal and deeply meaningful expression of their worldview. These were occasions to step outside the ordinary, to connect with the gods in a direct and often visceral way. The festivals were designed to mirror the attributes of the gods they honored. If a god embodied revelry, then the festival would be joyous and uninhibited. If a goddess represented fertility, then the festival would celebrate the very processes of life and growth, often with symbolic acts that underscored this connection. The aim was to invite the divine presence, to ensure the gods' favor, and to participate in the cosmic dance of creation and renewal. This holistic understanding meant that human passion, desire, and the celebration of the body's life force were not seen as separate from the spiritual, but as integral components of a sacred cosmos, worthy of reverence and communal expression. It was within this rich tapestry of belief that the so-called erotic festivals found their profound meaning and purpose, not as acts of mere indulgence, but as sacred rites essential for the well-being of their world. The ancient Greeks, long before the grand temples of Athens or the epic poems of Homer, were a people deeply connected to the earth. Their very survival depended on the land, on the rhythm of the seasons, and on the bounty that sprang forth from the soil. In those early days, life was harsh and unpredictable. A good harvest meant sustenance, a bad one, starvation. The cycle of planting and reaping, the birth of livestock, and the continuation of the family line were not merely practical matters, they were the very essence of existence. You can imagine the deep anxiety that must have accompanied the sowing of seeds, the watchful waiting for rain, and the fervent hope for a fruitful yield. The very air they breathed, the water they drank, and the food they ate were direct gifts from the earth, and thus from the unseen forces which governed it. This constant, palpable dependency shaped their entire worldview, forging a profound spiritual bond with the natural world. This profound reliance on nature led them to perceive the world around them as imbued with divine power. They saw the sun as a life-giver, warming the earth and encouraging growth, the rain as a blessing, nourishing the parched ground, and the earth itself as a nurturing, fertile mother from whom all life emerged. Every ripple in a stream, every rustle in the leaves, every burst of new life after winter's chill spoke to them of unseen forces at work. They understood instinctively that life begat life, and that this fundamental principle applied not only to human beings, but to every living thing. The fertility of the soil, the fecundity of animals, ensuring the continuation of herds and flocks, and the procreation within their own communities, guaranteeing the survival of their lineage, were all seen as interconnected manifestations of the same cosmic, sacred energy. There was no distinct line drawn between the vital force that made a field of grain flourish and the one that brought forth a child. It was all part of the grand interconnected tapestry of existence, orchestrated by powerful, often capricious, divine beings. It was this understanding that gave rise to their earliest rituals, long before the complex Olympian pantheon was fully formalized. These were not intellectual exercises, but heartfelt, often communal expressions of their desire to align with these powerful forces. They sought to honor the deities they believed governed these cycles, to plead for their favor, and to participate in the divine act of creation. These were the first fertility rites, born from a desperate need for abundance and a deep reverence for the mysterious processes of life itself. You would find villagers gathered, perhaps under open sky, their faces turned towards the heavens, their hands in the rich, dark earth, performing acts designed to encourage the very life that sustained them. These might involve simple offerings of the first fruits of the harvest, laid out on altars of rough-hewn stone, or the sacrifice of animals to ensure the health and prolificacy of the flocks, the smoke from the fires carrying their pleas heavenward. These early practices were often simple yet profoundly significant, rooted in the rhythms of agricultural life. They involved a kind of sympathetic magic, where human actions mirrored the natural processes they wished to encourage, believing that by imitating life, they could summon it. A communal dance might imitate the swaying of grain in the wind, invoking a bountiful harvest, or a procession might symbolize the journey of life from seed to harvest, from barrenness to fruitfulness. The very act of coming together, of sharing a common purpose and a collective hope, strengthened their belief in the power of these rituals. They were not just passively asking for something, they were actively participating in the sacred drama of life, death, and rebirth, feeling themselves a part of the vast living cycle. This collective participation fostered a deep sense of community and shared destiny, linking each individual's well-being directly to the health and abundance of the land. As their society evolved, so too did these rituals, becoming more formalized and elaborate, often centered around specific deities who personified these life-giving forces. Gaia, the primordial earth goddess, was among the earliest revered, representing the very ground upon which they walked and from which all life sprang. Her presence was felt in the solidity beneath their feet and the nourishment that rose from it. Later, Rhea, often associated with the wildness of nature and the mother of the Olympian gods, also embodied this generative power, a force that was both nurturing and untamed. These goddesses and others who followed were seen as the divine sources of all fertility, not just of crops, but of animals and human beings alike. Their blessings were essential for the very continuity of the family, the tribe, and the nascent city-states. The connection between human procreation and the fertility of the land was seamless in their worldview. They did not separate the act of love between a man and a woman from the growth of a seed into a plant, or the birth of a calf. Both were expressions of the same vital energy, the same divine spark that permeated the universe. Therefore, honoring the gods of fertility meant honoring all forms of life, including the very human capacity for desire and procreation, which was seen not as something base, but as a sacred extension of the cosmic life force. It was a holistic view where the personal and the cosmic were intricately intertwined, and where the sacred was found not just in grand pronouncements from high altars, but in the quiet miracle of a sprouting seed, the joyful bleating of a newborn lamb, and the tender intimacy between husband and wife. These rituals were their profound way of acknowledging and celebrating this fundamental truth, ensuring the continuity of their world year after year, generation after generation, anchoring their entire civilization to the earth beneath their feet and the divine breath within them. From these foundational beliefs, the Greeks developed specific cults and practices, each reflecting a unique facet of their understanding of the divine and its connection to human existence. Among the most compelling, and perhaps the most misunderstood in a modern context, was the worship of Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, ecstasy, and liberation. He was a deity whose very presence challenged the ordered, rational world of the Olympian gods, embodying the raw, untamed forces of nature and the deeper, often irrational currents of the human psyche. His domain extended beyond mere intoxication. He was the god of fertility, of drama and transformation, of the breaking down of boundaries, and of the joyful, sometimes terrifying, surrender to primal experience. Dionysus was unique among the Greek gods in his origin and the profound nature of his worship. Born from the thigh of Zeus, after his mortal mother Semele, a princess of Thebes, was consumed by the overwhelming glory of Zeus's true divine form, Dionysus carried within him a dual nature. He was both the bringer of intoxicating joy and the instigator of terrifying madness, the source of fertile abundance and the embodiment of destructive chaos. His epithets, such as Bromios, the roarer, or Lysios, the liberator, hinted at the powerful, often overwhelming experiences his worship invoked. Unlike the stately public rituals of Zeus or the disciplined civic-focused ceremonies for Athena, the worship of Dionysus was often wild, uninhibited, and deeply personal. His cult spread across Greece, particularly among women and those on the fringes of conventional society, offering a profound release from rigid societal norms and a direct, visceral experience of the divine. It was a path to transcendence that bypassed intellectual understanding in favor of raw, embodied sensation. His festivals, known most widely as the Dionysia or Bacchanalia, were renowned for their ecstatic nature. These were not quiet contemplative ceremonies held within temples, but vibrant, often tumultuous gatherings that frequently took place in wild, natural settings. Participants, especially women known as maenads, a name meaning the raving ones or frenzied ones, would deliberately abandon their everyday domestic lives and retreat to the mountainsides or deep within wild forests. Here, amidst the rustling leaves, the cool stone of ancient rocks, and the earthy scent of pine and damp soil, they would engage in frenzied, often exhausting dances. These dances pulsed to the insistent, hypnotic rhythm of hand drums, the piercing, reedy sound of aulos, double flutes, and the rhythmic clash of cymbals. Wine, the sacred gift of Dionysus, flowed freely, further dissolving inhibitions and fostering a profound sense of collective euphoria and communion with the divine. The maenads and their male counterparts, the satyrs, mythological beings with human upper bodies and goat-like legs and horns, embodying wild sexuality and revelry, carried the thrysus, a tall staff topped with a pine cone and often entwined with ivy and grapevines. This was not merely a decorative prop, it was a potent symbol of fertility, divine energy, and the god's own generative power. These were not merely drunken orgies, as later, more prudish or misinformed interpretations might suggest. Rather, they were profound sacred rites, a deliberate and disciplined attempt to transcend the boundaries of the individual self and to merge with the god's primal, untamed energy. Through the repetitive, often exhausting dance, the intoxicating music, and the collective frenzy, participants sought ecstasis, a term meaning literally a standing outside oneself. This was a state of divine madness, a temporary suspension of rational thought, where the human soul could shed its mortal constraints and experience a direct, unmediated connection to the divine. In this state, they felt a profound sense of liberation, a shedding of the anxieties and inhibitions imposed by daily life. It was a recognition that life, in its rawest, most fundamental form, was both beautiful and terrifying, bursting with an unrestrained creative power that encompassed both creation and destruction. The tearing apart of sacrificial animals, known as sparagmos, and the subsequent eating of raw flesh, homophagia, were extreme, highly symbolic acts. They underscored this direct, visceral connection to the wild, untamed aspects of nature, embodying the brutal yet essential cycle of death and rebirth inherent in the natural world, and a complete absorption of the divine animal spirit. The worship of Dionysus, therefore, celebrated the fundamental life force itself, the irresistible urge to grow, to procreate, to experience joy and sorrow with an equal, unbridled intensity. It was an acknowledgement that fertility was not solely about bountiful fields and successful crops, but about the very essence of existence, the vibrant, sometimes overwhelming power that drove all living things, including humanity. The festivals were a communal way to honor this primal energy, to participate in it actively, and to ensure its continued abundance for the community and the natural world. The uninhibited expression of passion and emotion during these rites was seen as a sacred act, a direct offering to a god who represented the very pulse of life. It provided a powerful counterpoint to the more formal, civic-oriented worship of other gods, offering an essential outlet for the irrational, intuitive, and deeply sensual aspects of human experience that could not be contained by conventional society. This profound connection to the earth's bounty, the animalistic urges, and the human body's capacity for pleasure and creation was absolutely central to his cult. The raw energy of the dance, the shared intoxication, and the communal expression of primal urges forged a powerful, enduring bond among the participants, reminding them of their shared humanity and their deep, inextricable connection to the living world. The festivals were a sacred space where the usual rules and hierarchies of society were temporarily suspended, allowing individuals to explore the depths of their own being and to connect with the divine energy that pulsed through all of creation. This was not a perversion in the Greek mind, but a profound religious experience, a journey into the very heart of what it meant to be alive, to be fully human in all its aspects. The very act of losing oneself in the rhythm of the dance and the profound melody of the music was a form of worship, a complete surrender to the overwhelming transformative power of the God. It was a way to tap into the wellspring of life itself, to feel the joy and sorrow, the ecstasy and fear, the creation and destruction that are all part of the human condition. The rituals were seen as a means of purification, a way to shed the burdens and anxieties of everyday life and to emerge renewed, revitalized, and profoundly reconnected to the divine flow of existence. They were a celebration of life in its most potent, unvarnished form, recognizing that true vitality often lies beyond the grasp of reason and order. It was a sacred wildness, a necessary counterbalance to the rigid structures of society, a reminder that the divine was not only in the lofty heavens, but also in the very blood that pulsed within them, and in the earth that sustained them. The communal nature of these rites fostered a powerful sense of belonging, a shared experience of the sacred that transcended individual identity. It allowed for the free expression of emotions that were often suppressed in daily life, leading to a cathartic release and a deeper understanding of oneself and one's place within the vast cosmic order. The mystery and allure of these practices lay precisely in their ability to transport participants beyond the mundane, into a realm where the divine was tangibly felt, where the boundaries between human and God, between conscious and unconscious, blurred in a swirl of primal energy. This was the essence of Dionysian worship, a full-bodied embrace of life's intoxicating, untamed power. While Dionysus stirred the soul with wine and wild abandon, drawing forth the primal, untamed aspects of human nature and connecting individuals to a profound, liberating ecstasy. There was another deity whose presence reminded the Greeks that life's very continuation, its beauty, and its deepest joys rested upon a different yet equally powerful force, Aphrodite. She was the goddess of love, beauty, pleasure, and procreation, embodying the irresistible allure and generative power of existence itself. Her origins, steeped in myth, further underscored her connection to the fundamental forces of the cosmos. One prevalent myth described her birth as rising fully formed from the sea foam near the island of Cyprus. after the castration of Uranus, the primordial sky god, whose severed genitals fell into the ocean. This dramatic genesis linked her directly to the very origins of life and cosmic fertility, a power that transcended mere human understanding. Other tales suggested she was the daughter of Zeus, the king of the gods, and Dione, a lesser-known Titaness. But regardless of her precise lineage, her essence was always tied to the blossoming of life, the irresistible pull of attraction, and the sacred act of creation. For the ancient Greeks, human desire, the very essence of what we might call the erotic, was not merely a physical impulse or a fleeting pleasure. It was a divine spark, a potent force that reflected the goddess's own power. To deny this fundamental aspect of life was, in their view, to deny a part of the divine order, to reject a gift from the gods themselves. Therefore, her cults and places of worship, especially in vibrant centers like Corinth and her mythical birthplace of Cyprus, were not hushed, austere spaces. Instead, they were lively, colorful, and often public arenas where the sacredness of human passion and the joyful celebration of procreation were openly acknowledged and revered. Her worship encouraged a profound recognition that the act of bringing new life into the world, the very force that ensured the survival and flourishing of families, clans, and entire cities, was not only a natural process, but also a deeply sacred duty, blessed and overseen by Aphrodite herself. Her festivals, known as Aphrodisia, were vibrant communal events, often marked by joyous processions, offerings of flowers and incense, and heartfelt prayers for fertility. These gatherings were not solely about unrestrained indulgence, though joy, pleasure, and uninhibited expression were certainly present and encouraged. They were, at their core, communal affirmations of life's inherent abundance, of the beauty of the human form, and of the profound, undeniable connection between love, desire, and the continuation of the species. Through spirited dance, melodious song, and sometimes even through ritualistic acts of sacred prostitution in certain temples, a practice that, to the Greek mind, was a direct participation in the divine process of creation rather than a secular transaction. The Greeks sought to embody and honor the life-giving force of Aphrodite. These acts were viewed as potent rites of fertility, a way to ensure bountiful harvests from the earth, healthy offspring for the community, and the ongoing vitality and prosperity of their city-states. It is crucial to understand that, unlike a modern understanding that might often separate the spiritual from the carnal, the ancient Greeks saw them as intrinsically and indivisibly linked. The term erotic in their context derived from Eros, the primordial god of love and desire, often depicted as Aphrodite's mischievous son or companion, represented far more than mere physical intimacy. It embodied the fundamental attraction that brought all things into being, the cosmic force of coming together, of union and generation. It was the powerful force that drew male to female, the vital energy that connected seed to soil, the creative impulse that led to artistic expression, and the very act of bringing forth new ideas. Therefore, honoring Aphrodite meant honoring this fundamental principle of attraction, union, and generation. It was an acknowledgement that without this powerful, divinely inspired drive, life itself would cease to flourish, the cycles of nature would falter, and the human lineage would end. It was a celebration of the interconnectedness of all living things, from the smallest seed to the grandest human passion. Just as Dionysus brought liberation through ecstatic union with the wild, untamed aspects of nature, allowing individuals to transcend their everyday constraints, Aphrodite brought fulfillment and continuation through the celebration of love, beauty, and the profound life-affirming act of creation. Both deities, in their distinct yet complementary ways, were essential threads in the vibrant and intricate tapestry of ancient Greek religious life. Their worship demonstrated how deeply intertwined the divine was with every single aspect of human existence, from the most profound spiritual experience to the most intimate human connection, illustrating a worldview where the sacred permeated the mundane and the gods were present in every beat of the human heart and every cycle of the natural world. The ancient Greeks also understood that life itself, in its most fundamental cycles of growth and renewal, was a divine force, worthy of profound reverence and celebration. This understanding was perhaps nowhere more deeply enshrined than in the sacred rites dedicated to Demeter, the goddess of agriculture and harvest, and her daughter, Persephone. These rituals, known as the Eleusinian Mysteries, were among the most ancient and revered religious ceremonies in all of Greece, held annually at the town of Eleusis, a significant cult center near Athens. The story at the heart of the Eleusinian Mysteries is one of profound loss and triumphant return, mirroring the very cycles of the natural world upon which human life depended. Persephone, the beautiful daughter of Demeter, was gathering flowers in a meadow when Hades, the powerful and stern god of the underworld, emerged from a chasm in the earth. He seized Persephone and dragged her down into his dark, subterranean realm, intending to make her his queen. Demeter, upon discovering her daughter's disappearance, was consumed by an inconsolable grief. As she roamed the earth, searching frantically for Persephone, her sorrow cast a profound pall over the world. The fields became barren, the crops withered, and the trees ceased to bear fruit. A great famine began to grip the land, threatening all of humanity. The very source of life on earth seemed to dry up, reflecting the deep emotional agony of the goddess. Animals perished, and even the rivers began to dwindle. The earth, once vibrant and bountiful, became a desolate wasteland, a silent testament to Demeter's anguish. The cold winds swept across empty plains where grain once flourished, and the sun seemed to offer no warmth to the parched soil. Seeing the suffering of mortals and fearing the complete destruction of life on earth, Zeus, the king of the gods, finally intervened. He commanded Hades to release Persephone. However, Hades, cunning as he was, had already tricked Persephone into eating a few pomegranate seeds while she was in the underworld. This act, according to ancient custom, bound her to his realm. A compromise was eventually reached. Persephone would spend a portion of the year, typically 1/3, with Hades in the underworld, and the remainder with her mother on earth. This myth provided the ancient Greeks with a powerful explanation for the changing seasons. Demeter's joy at her daughter's return brought forth the fertile spring and summer, while her sorrow during Persephone's absence caused the barrenness of autumn and winter. In her immense relief and joy at Persephone's return, Demeter is said to have revealed her sacred rites to the people of Eleusis. These were the Eleusinian Mysteries, a series of secret initiations that promised participants a blessed afterlife and a deeper understanding of the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. The core of these mysteries was kept strictly secret, with initiates sworn to an oath of silence, punishable by death if broken. This ensured the sacredness and exclusivity of the knowledge imparted. The mysteries were not merely about agricultural fertility, they were about the fertility of existence itself, extending beyond the grave. Participants underwent a journey of purification, which included ritual bathing in the sea, fasting, and a long sacred procession from Athens to Eleusis. This procession, often involving thousands of initiates, was a pilgrimage of transformation. Along the sacred way, they would chant and perform ritual acts, preparing their minds and bodies for the profound revelations that awaited them within the sanctuary at Eleusis. Upon arrival, initiates would enter the telesterion, a large, dimly lit hall specifically designed and built for the mysteries. Here, under the watchful eyes of the priests and priestesses, the most sacred rituals took place. While the exact details remain unknown, it is believed that initiates witnessed sacred dramas involving objects and symbols that illustrated the myth of Demeter and Persephone. They also partook in a sacred drink called kykeon, a mixture of barley, water, and mint, which may have contributed to a heightened state of perception or understanding. The experience was designed to be deeply personal and transformative, leading to a profound sense of awe and spiritual revelation. The erotic aspect of the Eleusinian mysteries was not expressed in overt sexual acts, but in the celebration of the fundamental life force, the power of regeneration, and the promise of new beginnings. It was an understanding that life springs from death, just as a seed must die to bring forth a new plant. This was the ultimate fertility, the continuation of life itself, both in the natural world and in the human soul. The mysteries offered solace from the fear of death, providing a hope for a meaningful existence beyond the mortal coil. They instilled a deep reverence for the earth's abundance and the divine forces that ensured its bounty. For the ancient Greeks, participating in these mysteries was a way to align themselves with the cosmic order, to ensure the continued fertility of their lands, and to secure a favorable destiny in the afterlife. It was a recognition that all life, from the sprouting grain to human consciousness, was part of a grand, divinely orchestrated cycle of creation and renewal. The rituals provided a communal space for profound spiritual connection, where the boundaries between the human and the divine, between life and the promise of rebirth, seemed to dissolve. It was a quiet, yet incredibly powerful affirmation of life's perpetual sacred flow. The Eleusinian mysteries, with their profound solemnity and promise of rebirth, represented one sacred facet of the ancient Greek understanding of life and fertility. These were deeply personal, secretive rites, offering solace and hope for the afterlife, linking human existence to the eternal cycles of the earth. Yet, the ancient Greeks, in their comprehensive worldview, also acknowledged and celebrated a wilder, more untamed aspect of nature's immense power, a primal force embodied by the unique deity known as Pan. He was a god of the wild, of shepherds and their flocks, of mountains and forests, and of those untamed remote places where the orderly structures of human civilization faded away and primal instincts reigned supreme, You would instantly recognize Pan by his distinctive and somewhat startling appearance. The powerful shaggy legs and cloven hooves of a goat, the curved horns sprouting from his forehead, and the torso and face of a man often adorned with a mischievous, knowing, or even slightly unsettling grin. He was a creature of the liminal spaces, dwelling not in the grand halls of Olympus, but lurking in the cool shadows of grottos, dancing among the ancient trees on sun-dappled slopes, or resting by a hidden stream, often accompanied by nymphs, the ethereal spirits of springs, trees, and mountains, who shared his untamed spirit. His very essence was woven into the fabric of the natural world, a rustling in the leaves, a sudden shift in the breeze, the distant bleating of a flock. Pan's very name is deeply rooted in the concept of sudden, pervasive fear, giving us the word panic. He was known to inspire this irrational, overwhelming terror in travelers who dared to wander alone into his wild domain, particularly at midday, when the sun beat down and the world seemed to hold its breath, a silence broken only by the buzzing of insects. Imagine a lone shepherd tending his flock deep in the silent vast expanse of the mountains, hearing an unexpected rustle in the dense undergrowth, or a strange, unsettling sound carried on the dry, hot wind, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. That sudden, inexplicable terror, a feeling of being profoundly alone, yet intensely watched by unseen, powerful forces, was attributed directly to Pan. It was the primal fear of the unknown, the recognition of human fragility and insignificance in the face of untamed nature's raw, indifferent power. However, his complex nature was not solely about fear and wildness. He also embodied uninhibited joy, spontaneous revelry, and the raw, unbridled vitality that pulsed through the natural world. He was the spirit of the playful chase, the joyous pursuit of life, and the vibrant, fertile energy that permeated every living thing, from the smallest blade of grass to the mightiest oak. He was the guardian of the wilderness, ensuring the fertility of flocks and the abundance of game. His laughter, when it rang out through the woods, was said to be infectious, inviting all who heard it to shed their inhibitions and join in the celebration of life. Unlike the more formal Olympian gods, who often had magnificent temples erected in their honor within bustling city walls, Pan's worship was more often found outdoors, in simple, rustic shrines, in secluded caves, or simply wherever nature held undisputed sway. The very landscape became his sacred space. His presence was palpable in the rhythmic bleating of goats echoing across a hillside, the sharp, invigorating scent of pine needles carried on a brisk breeze, and, most famously, in the haunting, echoing melody of his syrinx, or panpipes. This simple, yet profoundly evocative instrument, which he crafted from reeds, was his constant companion. He was a master musician, and his wild improvisational tunes could stir the heart, inviting both nymphs and adventurous mortals to join in wild impromptu dances, a spontaneous, unchoreographed celebration of life's raw, untamed energy. These were not rigid formal rituals, but rather spontaneous outbursts of movement and sound, a primal response to the sheer exuberance of existence itself. Pan's festivals, when they occurred, were far less structured and formal than those dedicated to Demeter or even Dionysus. They typically took place in the open air, embracing the very wildness that defined him. They were characterized by a powerful sense of liberation, a joyous shedding of societal constraints, and an embrace of the fundamental, often overwhelming impulses that drive all living creatures. The erotic element in Pan's worship was not about formalized human sexual acts in the way modern society might narrowly interpret it. Rather, it was deeply rooted in the inherent pervasive fertility of the wild itself, the powerful, instinctual drive to procreate and ensure the continuation of life. It was about the untamed, unburdened expression of life force, the joyous, almost animalistic embrace of nature's bounty and its relentless cycles of reproduction. His presence connected humans directly to their own primal urges, reminding them of their deep-seated place within the greater, untamed tapestry of the natural world. In his domain, the wildness within humanity was not suppressed, but allowed to surface, to revel in its profound connection to the earth and its raw, generative power. This was a form of worship that celebrated life in its most fundamental, uninhibited, and often boisterous forms, a recognition that the erotic was a force of creation, even in its most untamed manifestations. While Dionysus also represented ecstasy and liberation, often through the transformation induced by wine and divine madness, Pan's ecstasy was more rustic, more directly tied to the physical landscape and its creatures. Dionysus invited a kind of spiritual intoxication, a breaking down of boundaries through revelry and theatricality. Pan, by contrast, offered a more raw, earthy vitality and a visceral connection to the land and the untamed spirit of the animal kingdom. He was the embodiment of nature's spontaneous, unpredictable, and endlessly fertile energy. A reminder that life, in its purest form, is a wild, joyful, and often untamable force, constantly renewing itself. His worship served as a powerful counterpoint to the more ordered, structured aspects of Greek life, providing, as you delve deeper into the nature of these ancient Greek celebrations, you begin to understand that their worldview embraced all aspects of life, including the raw, generative power that ensures its continuation. This profound understanding is nowhere more evident than in their widespread use of what are known as phallic symbols during their festivals. These were not mere representations of human anatomy, nor were they considered crude or shameful by the standards of their era. Instead, they were potent, deeply sacred symbols, embodying the very essence of life's renewal and abundance. For the Greeks, the act of creation, whether of a human life, a bountiful harvest, or a thriving herd, was intrinsically linked to the divine. You would have encountered these symbols in a multitude of forms and contexts. Sometimes they were colossal, elaborate effigies, meticulously crafted from wood, leather, or other natural materials, often adorned with vibrant ribbons, fresh flowers, or even painted with rich, earthy colors that caught the sunlight. These grand representations were carried proudly and ceremonially in public processions, forming the very centerpiece of the festivities. At other times, smaller, more stylized versions were fashioned from clay, stone, or bronze and placed with reverence on household altars, at the entrances of homes, at crossroads, or within sacred groves. Their presence was a constant, visible reminder of the life-giving forces at work in the world, a tangible connection to the creative pulse of existence. Their primary purpose was deeply rooted in the agricultural cycle that governed Greek life, a cycle of planting, growth, and harvest that dictated survival. Just as the earth needed to be fertile and receptive to yield its bounty, so too did humans and animals need to procreate to ensure the continuation of their lineage, their communities, and their flocks. The phallus, therefore, was a direct and powerful representation of this fundamental life-giving force, a visible prayer for the earth to be fruitful and for all living things to multiply. It symbolized the fertility of the land, promising rich harvests of grain, the sweet abundance of grapes for wine, and the healthy growth of olive trees. It invoked the fecundity of livestock, ensuring strong herds and thriving flocks, and it was a potent charm for the healthy birth and robust growth of children, securing the future generations of the polis, the city-state. It was, in essence, a tangible appeal to the gods for prosperity and growth in all forms, a fundamental expression of their hopes for a thriving existence year after year. But the significance of these symbols extended far beyond mere fertility. They also held a crucial apotropaic function. That is, they were believed to possess a powerful ability to ward off evil, to avert misfortune, and to protect against malevolent spirits or the ill effects of envy and the evil eye. The raw, uninhibited, and vital power they represented was thought to scare away anything that might threaten the community's well-being or the individual's safety. Imagine a farmer placing a small, unadorned phallic image at the edge of his fields, not as an act of impropriety, but as a solemn invocation for a good yield and a potent protective charm against blight, pests, or unseen dangers that could ruin his livelihood. Or consider a household displaying one near the main entrance, not as an indecent display, but as a powerful guardian against illness, ill will, and any negative influences that might seek to enter and disrupt the harmony of the home. This protective aspect reinforces the idea that these symbols were deeply integrated into the Greek sophisticated understanding of cosmic order, and their constant interaction with both benevolent and potentially harmful forces in the world around them. The processions themselves, particularly those associated with the cult of Dionysus, were vibrant, dynamic, and often gloriously uninhibited. You would have witnessed throngs of revelers, sometimes adorned with masks depicting satyrs or maenads, carrying these large phallic representations with a sense of joyous abandon, their voices raised in song. The air would have been filled with rhythmic music, the insistent beat of drums, the reedy, captivating sound of aulos pipes, and the collective sound of singing and chanting that echoed through the streets. There would have been laughter, playful taunts, and often ribald yet ritually sanctioned banter exchanged between the participants and the eager spectators. This public display was never an act of private lust or a mere endorsement of sexual activity in its modern sense. Instead, it was a collective affirmation of life, a communal release of inhibitions, and a shared profound celebration of creation itself. The multi-sensory experience, the sights, the sounds, the shared energy, and even the earthy smells of the procession all merged into a single, powerful expression of gratitude for life itself and a fervent hope for its continued flourishing. In these moments, the strict boundaries between the sacred and the profane, as we might understand them today, simply dissolved. The human body, its desires and its reproductive capacities were seen as integral parts of the divine plan, direct reflections of the God's own generative power. The act of procreation was not separated from the spiritual realm. It was, in fact, understood as a sacred act, a direct participation in the endless cycle of life and death, growth and decay that the gods themselves governed and embodied. In embracing these symbols and incorporating them so prominently into their most important rituals, the Greeks were acknowledging and honoring the fundamental, undeniable force that drives all existence. From the smallest seed bursting forth from the earth to the grandest deity on Mount Olympus, they understood that the vitality of their world and their very survival depended on the continuous flow of this creative energy. These symbols were not about shame or hidden desires. They were about open, communal reverence for the power of life, a power that was both earthy and divine, a force that permeated every aspect of their world. They remind us that for the ancient Greeks, the sacred was not confined to temples or abstract thought, but pulsated through the very act of living, breathing, and creating. These vibrant displays, from the symbolic phallus to the uninhibited dance, were never isolated acts of individual devotion. They were, at their very core, profoundly communal events, woven tightly into the intricate fabric of daily life in ancient Greece. Imagine for a moment the sun-drenched courtyards of Athens, or the winding, dusty paths leading to a humble rural sanctuary, perhaps tucked away amidst olive groves or on a quiet hillside. These were not places of quiet, solitary contemplation, but of vibrant, boisterous, and utterly shared experience. The entire community, from the highest magistrates of the city to the simplest farmer toiling in the fields, participated with a fervor that transcended mere obligation. It was a collective outpouring of gratitude, a deep, resonant thank you to the powerful gods for the very gift of existence itself, for the astonishing fertility of their precious fields, the miraculous abundance of their harvests, and the vital continuation of their lineage across generations. This communal aspect was absolutely paramount. It fostered an unparalleled sense of unity, forging a shared identity that transcended individual differences and occasional rivalries. When citizens gathered for the great Dionysia, the more intimate Lenaya, or the sacred women-only Thesmophoria, they were not merely passive spectators observing a ritual. They were active, indispensable participants in a grand sacred drama that unfolded around them. The very act of marching shoulder to shoulder in a long procession, chanting the ancient hymns, sharing the ritual feast prepared with reverence, or witnessing the dramatic performances that spoke of divine myths, created an unbreakable, almost tangible bond between them all. The very air would hum with a palpable anticipation, a collective energy building as the sounds of flutes and drums began to fill the ancient stone spaces and echo through the narrow streets. You would feel yourself dissolving into something far larger than your individual self, becoming part of a living stream connecting the present moment with all its immediate sensations to the ancient, eternal rhythms of the earth and the timeless, potent power of the gods above. The joyous shouts, the rhythmic stomping of countless feet, and the shared, uninhibited laughter would have echoed through the bustling streets and across the open fields, cementing a profound sense of collective purpose and belonging among everyone present. The rich smell of roasting meats and sweet, heady wine would mingle in the warm air, adding to the immersive sensory experience, truly making these events an all-encompassing celebration of life in its fullest bloom. These festivals blurred the lines between the sacred and the everyday in a profound way that is often difficult for us to fully grasp in our modern understanding. For the ancient Greeks, life itself, in all its messy, joyous, sometimes chaotic, and often unpredictable forms, was deeply imbued with divinity. The gods were not distant, austere, or unreachable figures residing in a far-off heaven. They were intimately involved in human affairs, embodying the very forces that shaped existence itself, from love and war to growth and decay. Therefore, to celebrate life's vibrant vitality, its inherent generative power, its inherent pleasures, was not merely an act of indulgence. It was to participate directly, profoundly, in the divine essence. The revelry, the unbridled exuberance, was not considered profane. It was understood as a legitimate and essential form of worship. The laughter, the spontaneous songs, the shared wine, even the playful ribaldry and jesting, were all regarded as sacred acts, genuine expressions of a joyous acknowledgement of the God's ever-present and benevolent presence. The very act of living fully, with passion and uninhibited expression, became a profound, deeply felt affirmation of the cosmos and their place within it. You could witness this blurring of boundaries everywhere you looked during these special times. The majestic temples were not just solemn places of quiet worship. Their expansive courtyards often became vibrant stages for theatrical plays, communal areas for grand feasting, or central gathering points for the solemn yet spirited processions. The streets, usually mere conduits for commerce and daily movement, transformed into sacred arteries for the ceremonial movement of cult images and the colorful costumed worshippers. The very boundaries of the city itself seemed to expand, stretching to encompass the wildness of the surrounding fields and the untamed spirit of the gods, like Dionysus, with his liberating revelry, and Pan, with his primal rustic energy. During these extraordinary times, the ordinary ceased to be ordinary. A simple meal shared among friends became a communal offering to the gods. A spontaneous dance became a sacred trance. And the act of procreation, symbolized so vividly and openly, was understood as a direct continuation of divine creation itself. The flickering torchlight illuminating ancient stone, the murmur of many voices rising and falling, and the pervasive sense of shared exhilaration would have created an atmosphere unlike any other, a temporary world where the mundane was elevated and transformed into the divine. This profound participation in divine life offered the community a crucial and deeply needed sense of renewal. Daily life in ancient Greece could often be harsh, filled with unrelenting toil, constant uncertainty, and the ever-present threat of war, famine, or disease. These festivals provided a crucial release, a temporary suspension of rigid social norms and the everyday strictures that governed their lives. It was a time when the constraints of polite society could be loosened, when emotions could run free and unburdened, and when the primal energies of existence could be openly acknowledged, embraced, and celebrated without shame or inhibition. This cathartic release was not an escape from reality, as one might imagine, but rather a re-engagement with a deeper, more fundamental reality. The cyclical nature of life, death, and rebirth, which was so clearly mirrored in the agricultural year and in the perennial human experience. It was a spiritual cleansing, a profound reconnection to the very source of all vitality, allowing individuals and the community as a whole to emerge revitalized, re-energized, and ready to face the coming year with renewed spirit. The collective nature of these rituals reinforced the fundamental understanding that human flourishing and prosperity were dependent not just on individual effort and ingenuity, but on divine favor and the robust health of the community as a whole. A bountiful harvest, for instance, benefited everyone in the polis. A healthy family ensured the vital continuation of the city-state itself. Therefore, the rituals that ensured fertility and abundance were not just personal prayers whispered in private. They were civic duties performed with genuine enthusiasm, unwavering dedication, and collective purpose. The shared joy, the collective ecstasy, and the unified purpose strengthened the bonds of citizenship, reminding each individual of their indispensable place within the larger cosmic and social order. These were moments when the city breathed as one, united in its profound reverence for the powerful forces that sustain them all. So, when you consider these ancient Greek festivals, do not think of them as mere celebrations of physical pleasure or as simple acts of indulgence. Instead, view them as complex, multi-layered expressions of a sophisticated worldview where the sacred was inextricably linked to the natural world and to every facet of human experience. They were, in essence, a grand affirmation of life in its most vibrant, fertile, and generative forms, a profound act of communion with the divine forces that governed the universe and brought forth all creation. The erotic element, far from being a separate, isolated, or overtly indulgent aspect, was simply one integrated facet of this holistic participation in the abundant, generative power of the gods. It was a recognition that creation, in all its myriad forms, was inherently divine, and that humans, by embracing their own vitality and procreative potential, were mirroring the very essence of the cosmos. The echoes of their music, the lingering scent of their offerings, and the shared, uninhibited laughter would have lingered long after the processions dispersed and the revelry subsided, leaving behind a renewed spirit and a fortified sense of belonging within the living, breathing world, a world where gods and mortals danced in an eternal rhythm, bound together by mutual reliance and shared celebration. This profound interweaving of the human and the divine, expressed through joyous, life-affirming rituals, truly defined the ancient Greek approach to existence. You might find yourself contemplating these descriptions of ancient Greek festivals, perhaps with a sense of curiosity, or even a degree of bewilderment. When we hear terms like erotic festivals today, our modern minds often immediately conjure images of something private, perhaps even illicit or solely focused on carnal pleasure. Our contemporary understanding of erotic is typically narrow, rooted in personal gratification or romantic love, often detached from spiritual or communal significance. We tend to compartmentalize sexuality, separating it from the grander scheme of existence, viewing it as a human phenomenon distinct from the sacred or the cosmic. Modern thought, shaped by different philosophical and religious traditions, has often positioned the physical body and its desires in opposition to the spiritual or the divine. sometimes even deeming them as sources of temptation or impurity. This perspective can make it challenging to truly grasp the ancient Greek approach, which was fundamentally different in its integration of these elements. For them, the sacred was not a separate realm, but an inherent quality of the tangible world, infused into every aspect of life, including those expressions that might now be deemed solely physical. For the ancient Greeks, however, the very concept of eros, the root word from which erotic derives, was vastly different, encompassing a spectrum far broader and more profound than our modern interpretation allows. Eros was not merely about physical desire between individuals. It was a fundamental primal force that permeated the entire cosmos, a divine principle that drove creation itself. It was the irresistible urge towards life, towards growth, towards unity, and towards the propagation of all things. This was a cosmic eros, a universal attraction that brought elements together, sparked life in the fertile earth, ensured the blossoming of plants, the birth of animals, and the continuation of human generations. It was the very energy that made the world fertile and abundant, a force of creation that manifested in every sprout, every birth, every act of procreation. This eros was seen as the binding force of the universe, moving from primordial chaos towards order and beauty, a principle woven into the very fabric of existence, from the smallest seed to the grandest constellation. It was the dynamic power that allowed the world to renew itself ceaselessly, to overcome barrenness with life, and to perpetuate the divine order established by the gods. Without Eros, the world would stagnate, cease to grow, and eventually decay. It was a sacred, vital, and indispensable energy, the very essence of flourishing. When the Greeks honored their gods through what we might call erotic festivals, they were not engaging in acts of hedonism for their own sake, nor were they simply indulging in base desires. They were participating in deeply sacred rituals that acknowledged and invoked this profound cosmic eros. The explicit symbols, the joyful revelry, the uninhibited dancing, the very acts that might seem scandalous or crude to a modern observer, were, for them, deeply reverent expressions of their connection to the divine life force. The phallic symbols, for instance, were not simply representations of male anatomy. They were potent emblems of life itself, of generative power, of fertility that extended beyond human reproduction to the abundance of the fields, the overflowing of harvests, and the vitality of the entire natural world. They were symbols of blessing, protection, and prosperity, imbued with the sacred power of the gods themselves, particularly Dionysus, whose ecstatic rituals invited a direct experience of this raw, untamed eros, or Aphrodite, whose very presence embodied the allure and generative power of desire. These symbols and actions were understood as a form of ritual magic, a sympathetic invocation intended to ensure that the gods would continue to bestow their life-giving blessings upon the community and its land. The more enthusiastically and openly this life force was celebrated, the more abundant the blessings were believed to be, truly a prayer in motion. These were not private affairs, hidden in shadows. They were public, communal celebrations, vital threads in the fabric of their society. The festivals provided a sacred space where the usual boundaries of daily life could dissolve, allowing individuals to connect directly with the raw, untamed and joyous energy of the gods. Through shared experience, through song and dance, through the consumption of wine and the breaking of social conventions, participants sought to merge with the divine, to become conduits for that cosmic eros to flow into their lives and their land. It was a way of ensuring the cyclical renewal of nature, of guaranteeing the fertility of their crops and livestock, and of blessing their families with children. The collective participation in these rites fostered a profound sense of community, binding individuals together in a shared spiritual and physical experience. The release of inhibitions during these festivals was not seen as moral failing, but as a necessary catharsis, a shedding of the mundane to embrace the divine madness that brought forth life and creativity. It was a temporary return to a primal state, a deliberate engagement with the fundamental untamed forces that governed existence, ensuring the continued vitality of both the individual and the collective. These were moments of profound spiritual communion, reinforcing their place in the cosmic order. The Greeks understood that life, in all its forms, was inherently intertwined with this generative principle. To deny eros, to suppress it, would have been to deny the very essence of life and the power of the gods who embodied it. Their religious practices were therefore holistic, embracing the physical and the spiritual as inseparable components of existence. The human body was not seen as a vessel of sin or shame, but as a microcosm of the fertile universe, capable of experiencing and expressing divine energy. The passions of humanity, including desire, were not inherently negative. They were reflections of the divine spark within, a drive towards connection and creation that mirrored the forces at play in the universe. In this worldview, the sacred was not confined to temples or abstract thought. It pulsed through the veins of every living being, in the growth of every vine, and in the joyous, uninhibited expression of life itself. The pursuit of beauty, the experience of pleasure, the urge to procreate, all these were seen as echoes of the divine eros that animated the cosmos. They were not to be hidden or condemned, but acknowledged and integrated into a meaningful spiritual framework, forming a complete picture of human existence within a divinely ordered world. This deep reverence for the in-essence, these ancient festivals, with their vibrant expressions of life and passion, offer you a profound window into the very heart of the ancient Greek worldview. It was a perspective fundamentally different from many later civilizations, one that did not seek to separate the sacred from the profane or the physical from the spiritual. For the Greeks, the divine was not an abstract, distant force dwelling solely in the heavens, but an immanent presence woven into the very fabric of existence. Every rustle of leaves in a sacred grove, every surging wave of the sea that crashed upon their shores, every pulse of human desire, every act of procreation was perceived as a direct manifestation of divine power. Their gods were not only beings of great wisdom and justice, who decreed laws and judged mortals, but also beings of immense passion, jealousy, joy, and sorrow, reflecting the full spectrum of human experience elevated to a cosmic scale. This fluidity between the human and the divine meant that the realm of the gods was not far removed from their daily lives, but intimately intertwined with it, influencing every harvest, every love affair, and every moment of communal revelry and individual quietude. You see, for them, the so-called erotic element in their worship was not merely about fleeting physical pleasure, nor was it considered something to be hidden, suppressed, or ashamed of. Instead, it was understood as a fundamental creative life force, a potent, animating energy that drove fertility in the fields, ensuring the growth of vital crops like grain and grapes. It fueled procreation in all living beings, from animals to humans, guaranteeing the continuation of their species and their communities. And it even powered the very act of creation itself, whether in the forging of new generations, the crafting of magnificent works of art, or the birth of profound philosophical ideas. To honor Dionysus, Aphrodite, Demeter, or Pan through rituals that openly embraced the body, celebrated sexuality, and encouraged uninhibited joy was, in their eyes, to participate directly and vitally in the ongoing dynamic process of the cosmos. It was a deeply reverent acknowledgement that vitality, growth, abundance, and the continuation of life were precious gifts from the gods, and that humanity's role was to embrace and celebrate these gifts with profound reverence and overflowing enthusiasm. They perceived the world as inherently alive, pulsating with generative energy, a grand interconnected organism, and their festivals were a collective, visceral, and joyous affirmation of this fundamental truth. The sacred was not found only in quiet contemplation, but in the very exuberance of life. This holistic understanding meant that the boundaries we often draw today between nature and culture, body and mind, sacred and secular, or even male and female, were far more fluid, almost invisible, to the ancient Greeks. A farmer tilling his land was not just performing a laborious chore. He was engaging in a sacred act, cooperating with Demeter, the earth goddess, and Zeus, the sky father, to bring forth sustenance from the receptive earth. A young couple falling in love was not merely experiencing a personal emotion. They were touched by the irresistible, powerful influence of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, participating in a cosmic dance of attraction and union that mirrored the very forces of creation. The wild, untamed aspects of nature embodied by figures like Pan, with his goat-like legs and mischievous spirit, were not seen as chaotic threats to be subdued or controlled, but as potent, necessary forces to be respected and even revered, for they held the raw, untamed vital power of life itself, unconstrained by the often rigid dictates of human order. The very act of living, in all its messy, passionate, fertile, and sometimes unpredictable complexity, was seen as an act of worship, a continuous interaction with the divine. Furthermore, these communal practices provided a crucial outlet for collective expression and profound emotional release. In a society that highly valued order, reason, and civic duty, these festivals offered sanctioned spaces for ecstasy, for shedding social inhibitions, and for connecting with primal instincts that might otherwise be constrained. They were times when the rigid social hierarchy could temporarily blur, when the strictures of daily life and decorum could be momentarily set aside, allowing individuals to experience a profound sense of unity, not only with each other, their fellow citizens, but also with the divine forces that animated their world. The collective singing, the rhythmic dancing, and the abundant feasting reinforced social bonds and a shared cultural and religious identity, all under the benevolent, if sometimes unpredictable gaze of the Olympian gods. The rituals were not just symbolic gestures, they were transformative experiences designed to bring participants into a direct, visceral communion with the very powers they honored, making the divine tangible and immediate. Therefore, when you consider the ancient Greek erotic festivals, you should not interpret them through a narrow modern lens that might associate erotic solely with private physical acts or view it with discomfort. Instead, you are invited to view them as vibrant public celebrations of the entire interconnected cycle of life, from birth and vigorous growth, through abundant fertility and passionate union, to the inevitability of death and the promise of rebirth. They were profound expressions of gratitude for abundance, fervent prayers for continued prosperity, and deep communal acknowledgments of humanity's fundamental place within the vast, intricate, and interconnected web of existence. They reveal a people who found divinity not just in grand, imposing temples and solemn whispered prayers, but in the innocent laughter of children, the golden ripening of grain fields under the sun, the tender embrace of lovers, and the wild, untamed, breathtaking beauty of the natural world that surrounded them. Their understanding of the divine was expansive enough to encompass all aspects of being, including those primal, generative energies that ceaselessly drive life forward, ensuring its continuation and renewal. This enduring legacy of thought, where human desire, natural vitality, and the sacred were not just tolerated, but actively celebrated as interconnected and divine, profoundly shaped their art, their philosophy, and their understanding of the human condition. It led to the creation of magnificent sculptures that idealized the human form in all its athletic grace and sensual beauty, not as something shameful or base, but as a direct reflection of divine perfection and human potential. It influenced philosophers like Plato, who saw eros not just as physical love, but as a driving, upward moving force, a profound longing for truth, ultimate beauty, and absolute goodness, a yearning for the divine itself, propelling the soul towards higher knowledge. Their rich tapestry of myths, filled with gods and goddesses who freely express their passions, their loves, their rivalries, and their desires, further reinforce this integrated view, portraying a cosmos where the divine and the human were inextricably linked, constantly interacting, and often mirroring each other's deepest aspirations and struggles, triumphs, and sorrows. As you drift now, you can imagine that ancient world, a world where the air was thick with the earthy scent of wine and the sweet aroma of incense, where the joyous sounds of flutes and drums mingled with the uninhibited laughter and singing of celebrants, and where the line between mortal and immortal was wonderfully, beautifully blurred. It was a world where every aspect of life was imbued with sacred meaning, where